Morning Live. Hloni writing in and saying, until whites refrain from cosmetic reconciliation only displayed in public spaces, racism will always be with us. All right, Hloni, that's what your opinions are. Judy Stevens, how about a national sorry day combined with restitution? Not tokens, but meaningful sharing. All right, Judy writing to us there at Morning Live SABC. Petty saying there's intra-racism amongst everyone, and lately this has been shielded by people calling others darkies. Okay, Petty, thanks for writing into us. There's so many, but there were a few coming up by Steve Hofmeyer, actually, and I need to try and scroll down to actually find them. And he had added his voice into the conversation as well, and I'm sure a lot of people would like to hear what Steve Hofmeyer has to say about this conversation. One of the things he goes on to say is that the racism debate will not end for as long as we are not allowed to distinguish between collective contributions. That's the one tweet that he said. The other thing is saying skin color per se is passé. There are very few left who are biological determinists, but color does not come alone. Okay, Steve Hofmeyer, thank you very much for adding your views into this conversation as well. You know, there's so many differing views happening out here on Twitter. It's absolutely unbelievable. I can't begin to tell you what's being said here. It's actually quite difficult to follow all these differing opinions, Peter. But people are watching, people are contributing, and let me tell you something, people are listening. So let's continue listening. Peter.
Leanne, thank you very much indeed. So a couple of themes that have been touched on there, and as you answer some of these questions, I think if you can just throw them in at the back of your answers there. And I'm going to call the next three people, starting with Washington Makoni, table number 10. Let's get your thoughts.
Good morning. I'm Washington Makoni. I'm representing Climax Group of Companies. I think mine is not a question, it's just a contribution. I think at creation, God created man in his own image, to the effect that if you still have a mentality of seeing yourself being better than the person next to you, it means that you are still far from knowing the love of God. For God says, how can you claim to know me and yet you do not know your own brother? Thank you very much.
Okay, interesting thought. So perhaps religion has a role to play in solving our challenge. Mohammed Desai, table number 12.
Well, a short comment to Kali first. The apartheid leaders were one of the most well-educated people in this country when they acted out their racism against the South African majority. So education doesn't necessarily liberate. It's about addressing socio-economic issues, which it seems AfriForum is simply not interested in. But to the SG of the ANC, Comrade Gwede, how do we celebrate and advance non-racialism, because it's not, non-racialism wasn't born in 1994. It was born in the trenches of our struggle. How do we celebrate our history and advance that history?
Okay, if you remember that. And then Zwanele Mani, table number 3.
You know, I think all of us are trying to assist Kali. Kali, let me assist you. You say Kali is a good human being, but let's assist you, Kali. You see, I agree with the view that says we're talking about superiority, inferiority issue. The fact that black people continue to own less than 3% of the JSE is because they are deemed inferior, is because they're not going to be able to make good use of the ownership of the economy. The fact that black people continue to own less than 20% of the land is because black people are deemed monkeys who cannot plow. The fact that black people continue to be 13.6% of the top management of this country is an indication that black people are not trusted in terms of running a strategic level of the economy. When you appoint a black CEO, you have a duty to appoint another joint white CEO to babysit the black CEO because you've got no trust in black people. The fact that when you appoint black people in corporates, you then do content stripping, what that means is that you get called a CFO, but the responsibility of the CFO get removed from that position, but you remain with the title. This is what we're talking about. So we need to give this racism a face, and this is how it manifests in the workplace. When you look at promotions, you look at the fact that today, as we speak, the great number of promotions are still accruing to white people, and yet we're trying to correct the situation. The fact that Chris Hart, for instance, without an economics degree, but he can be called a household economist in the country without an economics degree, is racism. Because he's white, he is deemed ready to run with this. There's not one black economist in this country without a master's degree. But if you are white, you can be anything because you're deemed superior. So that is the issue of racism.
Okay, Kylie, let's start with you because it's fresh in the mind. Has he helped you?
Unfortunately, not whatsoever. I think Zwanele is making himself guilty of very big generalizations. I had a meeting with a black CEO of a large bank in the last week, and he has all the powers, so he's using certain examples to create the impression. I also fundamentally disagree with some of the figures that he said, that only 3% of the JSE is in so-called black hands. That number is growing fast, and we must also know that there are pension funds where everybody is contributing, and the vast majority are black people, so that those figures are not right. The biggest employer in the country is the civil service with more than 1 million employees. But the figures with regard to top management, he doesn't include that. So what we're unfortunately seeing, for certain people in the country to drive a political agenda, they want to continue to create a certain picture. To say, well, this is why we can do things that are unjust because that is how it looks, when the picture has changed. If Mr. Montash agrees with that picture, then the ANC government has failed. So then you must say, so that is not, these figures are being skewed.
Let me ask you this, because this is something that happens on a daily basis. 2 young people looking for student accommodation. One is Jabu Sutole, he's got a nice black accent, he phones state agent, have you got a place? And they say, no, we're full. Johan Prinsloo phones the same estate agent, and suddenly there's a place. How do we deal with that? How do we get that mindset that, hang on, the first person to call me who's able to pay is the one I give this flat to?
We should take those issues on, but when you give your examples, you must also give an example of a young girl whose surname is Bosov that wants to go to a certain race at the university, but she can't come in because there's a certain racial quota. So we must take those issues on, but what I'm saying, we must be balanced in terms of the examples we saying. And if I'm saying that, I'm not saying we should not take on racist estate agents. They should be tackled. But we should look at the broader picture to say this also happens to people from other communities.
All right. SG, if you could also add to Mohammed's celebrating non-racialism.
Non-racialism should be celebrated on an ongoing basis because it's a journey, it's not an event. And we must be committed to walking through that journey. If we're not, it's not going to happen. But let me start with a debate that is missing in this debate. Racial classification, which was a concept of apartheid, which classified people into African, colored, Indian, and white. The question that we should be asking in this debate, should that racial classification continue? The debate is on quietly. It must come to the open. If we say it should not be done, how are we going to see the progress of things? Let me tell you, in terms of the employment equity reports, we have 4 designated groups: white women, Indian, colored, African. And after a number of years, in terms of demographic, white women achieve, Indians achieve. Very low down there, colored and African do not achieve. Now, if we just say we do away with racial classification, how are we going to monitor progress in that area? I don't like racial classification. At the end of the day, we must reach a stage where humans are humans and not identified in terms of race. But with the situation of a system that we're coming from, which classified people and therefore created graduated inequality, how are we going to deal with it if we do away with it? And I think we should actually open all those chapters in the debate so that we rectify the problem that we're facing as a country. The biggest problem is that the majority of people are not, they are a minority in many respects. I think Opremachik put it very clear. I love his analysis when he says the numerical minority is a cultural majority, which also determines what goes into the public discourse. For example, I can tell you that it is us who determine the debate. The very majority is silent, is not heard, and actually there is a racial content to it. The last point I want to make, in the ANC, Kali, we always emphasize the fact that you can't separate the 3 contradictions: race, class, and gender. Because we were oppressed as a nation. That was racial oppression. We were exploited as a class. That's why you'll find out that when I worked in the mines, for a bigger part of my life working in the mines, I had no experience, because every contract was counted as one. If I have 20 years in a mine, I had 20 times 1. While my counterpart would have 20 years experience in a job. So that was the super exploitation that we're talking about. It's not just theoretical, it's practical. The fact that I could not be a miner and blast, and a white person with a standard 1, I have matric, could be a miner and then get the blasting certificate because it is for the scheduled person, which meant white person. Okay. In itself deprived me. And the fact that black women are oppressed 3 times is an issue that we should pull together and bring to this debate, because if we don't, the debate is going to be superficial. Okay.
All right, unfortunately we're going to have to take a quick break, and when we come back, we're going to start getting some closing thoughts, but I really do want to touch on that coloured Indian black debate, and also our institutions, are they able to manage the story? All of this after this break.
What time is it, Kali?